There was a massive corporate shakeup in WWE management on Thursday, with Vince McMahon forcing out his top two lieutenants, his co-presidents, George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, both of whom had been with the company for well over a decade. It was just 2 years ago that they were promoted to co-presidents and were appointed to the company's board of directors. The announcement this week said that they would depart the company effective immediately and will no longer serve on the boards. Not only have they been removed from their posts unceremoniously, this did not come off as some kind of organized mutual dismissal here. Just kind of out of nowhere on a Thursday, a week before earnings, this announcement comes out and they get booted off the board. And so this guy, Frank Riddick III, who served as a member of the board for over 11 years, has been named interim chief financial officer. He'll report directly to Vince McMahon. My condolences. And the company has began a search for a permanent chief financial officer and a chief revenue officer. This was the quote. This was the corporate speak press release quote from Vince McMahon. "I would like to thank George and Michelle for their 10 plus years of service and contributions to the organization. I am grateful for all that was accomplished during their tenure, but the board and I decided a change was necessary as we have different views on how best to achieve our strategic priorities moving forward." So this is an alarming move to make 1 week before their investor conference call. They have Q4 earnings coming up. I see some people online saying, oh, the first quarter earnings are next week. No, this is the earnings for the fourth quarter, end of the year. And I heard the news and I just thought to myself, with George gone, now who will they get to dodge and not answer questions when they're asked on these conference calls? The news, as you might imagine, sent their stock plummeting down as much as 28% on Friday. At one point, it was 28%. The stock went down, it went up a little bit, but it ultimately settled at a much lower number than it had been the day before. It was the biggest drop for the company in nearly 6 years. And it wiped out almost $1 billion in market value. Now, that does not mean they lost $1 billion. I see this, the company lost $1 billion on Friday. Valuation, revenue, two different things. But it's still not good. Because people are going to look at these stories and think the company lost $1 billion. And even to lose $1 billion in value, again, you can have a day where the stock goes down, the stock goes up. That's not good. That's not good. And this all has as much as anything to do with how vague and how sudden and just out of nowhere this announcement was. Maybe Vince McMahon has good reason for doing what he did. We don't know. We may never know. Barrios and Wilson, they're not going to come out and do some tell-all interview. If they have some kind of, NDA that they sign where they can't talk, I'm sure they got a very nice severance package. We're probably not going to hear anything from them, at least not for a very long time. So it's possible we may never know the full details of exactly what went down here. But who's to say that Vince McMahon didn't have good reason for doing what he did? The thing is, until he explains his actions or gives a little more guidance on what the hell happened here, and one line in a press release is not going to get the job done, in the meantime, all they're doing is creating panic and uncertainty. And so what happens? The stock falls. Now, WWE expects its full year 2019 adjusted OIBDA, which is operating income before depreciation and amortization, to be $180 million. Now, that would only be slightly ahead of last year's $179 million. That was the number I dug up. I believe that was the number from last year. But that's presumably with either TV money or Saudi money factored in. That wasn't there last year. So yeah, maybe it went up by $1 million, but if you factor in all this extra money that, in theory, they're getting, all of a sudden that doesn't look so impressive. But here's a key thing to keep in mind with this. This is a very important thing I want to mention here. Yes, it is very possible that this is a sign of lower than expected earnings coming this Thursday. It is also possible that the earnings will not be as bad as some people are saying they're going to be. So if they're down, but not down by too much, I could see the stock rising. Maybe not back to, I think it was at $62 before. I mean, a year ago, it was at $100. $100 a share, which was ridiculous. You talk about being overvalued. But it's very possible that if the earnings, that's not as bad as we thought it might be, stock goes back up to 50-something dollars. Who knows, maybe even 60-ish. This is all being driven by uncertainty right now. The stock market does not like that, but there are some very real problems that WWE has to face. As much money as the company is bringing in from these TV deals and from the Saudi Arabia deal, all of their key metrics are down. So you can talk about all the money from Fox and all the money from NBC Universal and all the money from the Saudi prince. All of their key metrics are down. And they cannot seem to figure out how to reverse that trend. They can't stop the bleeding. Live event attendance is down to the point now where they're actually cutting back on house shows. I just got done talking about house shows a few weeks ago, right, in the mailbag. Somebody asked me, why don't they just get rid of house shows? And I made the case for why I think that would be a terrible idea. And the way to go would be just to cut back on the number of them. You don't outright just get rid of them, but you scale back on the number of house shows, and that's what they have started to do. But not because, oh my God, we have this great concern for our talent. It's because attendance is down. They're not making as much money off of these shows. The people aren't coming out to see them as much. That's down. TV ratings are down. Merchandise is down. Network subscriptions are down, or at least stagnant. They've not been able to pass that 2 million mark like they wanted to many years ago. Their new UK deal that they signed with BT Sport, I would think, I don't know that the numbers were ever made public, is probably for less than whatever Sky was paying them. They were with Sky for 30 years. So who knows if that number is lower as well. Ask yourself this. Without all of that TV money, where the hell would this company be right now? You know, not giving a $9 million contract to Edge, I can tell you that. But seriously, where would WWE be right now were it not for all of that money from Fox and all of that money from NBC Universal? It's scary to think about. So these two get kicked to the curb by Vince McMahon over a disagreement over the vision of the company moving forward. That must have been one hell of a disagreement. I would love to know what these visions were. These weren't just two random executives in the company. These are the two people who effectively would have taken over if anything ever happened to Vince McMahon. You know, if he had some kind of android malfunction, they were his number 2 and number 3 in command. So for them to be pushed out, as all of these stories claim, is a very big deal. They were the faces of the company in the business world. You know, Barrios would lead all of the investor calls. They would sometimes attend outside events and outside business conferences on behalf of the company. It wasn't Vince McMahon going around giving these speeches or you know, Linda McMahon or whatever. It was these two. I guess Linda isn't technically connected anymore to the company, but you get my point. And for all this talk about, you know, bad creative, the company has been pretty strong on the business end of things in spite of a lot of these different metrics being down. You know, and me personally, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't own any WWE stock. I've never owned any WWE stock, although now probably would be a good time to get in. Buy some shares before it goes back up. You know, buy low, sell high, as they say. I think that this company is in real trouble if things ever go south with their TV partners, and whatever credit you want to give to Barrios and Wilson and their involvement in that, and they weren't the only ones who were responsible for the rights fees that they got. It wasn't like they just negotiated the whole deal themselves. Remember, WWE brought in an outside firm. I think it was, CAA or something. Yeah, they brought in a major firm, not unlike what MLW has done now, as they try to look for a TV rights deal themselves to help negotiate that for them. But these, you know, they were part of the process too. They were in the room when this happened. As much credit as you might want to give these two, they also should deserve some of the blame, along with Vince McMahon. But you know, Vince McMahon was never going to kick himself to the curb. That just wasn't going to happen. But you cannot minimize the role that these two played in this company. Now, Vince McMahon controls the company's voting power, something like 80% of it. So regardless of what the other board members want to do, that's why I love this quote in the press release. I and the board decided it was in the best interest of the company to basically get rid of these two. Regardless of what the other board members want to do, And he controls who those people are. He controls who the people are on the board. At the end of the day, what he says goes. What Vince McMahon wants, Vince McMahon gets. If he wants to get rid of somebody, I know the release says, again, it was a mutual decision with him and the board. It was a Vince McMahon call. This was a Vince McMahon decision. He wanted to make this move. There was little that the rest of the board was realistically going to do about it. What are they going to do? Fight him on it? As always, the buck stops with one man. That man is Vince McMahon. You know, when you hear me talk about the writers for Raw and for SmackDown and the product that you see on television outside of NXT, they're not writing for us. They're writing for an audience of one. And Paul Heyman's influence, it might finally be bearing some fruit on Monday nights. I say some. You know, it's going to take time. There's glimmers of hope that I see the last few weeks on Monday Night Raw. But how long before Heyman wants to do something or wants to push someone who Vince disagrees with? How long before he gets the boot, like Eric Bischoff did? It's inevitable. You know it's inevitable. You know at some point it's going to happen. Heyman's a smart guy. He can probably protect himself for a while, but it's inevitable. They play to an audience of one. It's still Vince McMahon's company. He can do what he wants, but we see a lot of faces come and go. Eric Bischoff got hired and fired so fast, it's almost like it never happened. These two got pushed out here because Vince's vision does not sync up with theirs, so gotta go. It's always someone else's fault. It's never Vince McMahon's fault. Always someone else's fault. I've said before, you can't fire your way out of whatever problems that you're facing. You can only pass the buck so many times. One thing that we should learn on Thursday that I'm very curious about is how much WWE is getting from USA Network for airing NXT on Wednesday nights. Now, there were unconfirmed reports many months ago that had the number pegged as high as $50 million. And then I think Meltzer claimed the number was actually closer to $30 million. There are some people who think that number may actually be zero, which I find very hard to believe. I have no idea where this is coming from. But I've seen that mentioned as well. There are some people who believe that it's possible that WWE is actually getting nothing. It's getting no money at all, other than exposure of putting NXT on USA. And if that's the case, and we'll know soon enough, you can draw your own conclusion there why NXT was moved to USA. But Thursday will tell the tale, because it would be reflected in those fourth quarter results. Even if there's no specific number listed that specifically says NXT, you know, here's the the number they're getting, they could lump it in with other revenue. It shouldn't be too hard, I wouldn't think, for people far smarter than I am to figure out how much of that money is likely coming from NXT on USA. So that's one of those things I'm curious to find out about. I mean, look, you can only read so many unconfirmed reports. This is a publicly traded company. They have to report their numbers, so it'll be in there somewhere. But all of this drama comes just 1 week before the first XFL games are being played. It is almost upon us this Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern on ABC, 5 p.m. on Fox. Teams take the field for the first XFL games. Sunday, there's 2 more games next Sunday on Fox and ESPN. Another money loser. This is going to be another money loser. If the XFL were to be successful, here's why I'm taking a less optimistic approach. At first, when this was announced, I tried to be nice. And I tried to give things the benefit of the doubt, and this time Vince McMahon is spending his own money, and he lessons learned from his mistakes in the past, and all, right? Now that we're a week away and I look at this, I come to the realization that this is going to fail. I can't say when, I can't say how quickly it will crash, but I believe that this is going to go the way that every single one of Vince McMahon's outside wrestling projects have gone. If this were to be successful, this would be the first time that Vince McMahon has had success with a venture outside of WWE. His track record with these things is abysmal. Some people would say that his track record with wrestling in recent years is abysmal. What makes you think that he's going to be able to go out and all of a sudden create this gigantic football success? I don't see this being any different, except this time he's using his own money. He better be. He better be, because if we find out that he's siphoning money from WWE to help pay for his vanity football project, That's going to make Wall Street even less happy.